You're probably familiar with Genius. Maybe you were a member of the forums, you may have even contributed to the site, or maybe you just see their videos pop up every now and then. At one time, Genius was valued at $280 million. Today, it's been bought for less than a third of that by a holding company that buys dead startups and milks them for ad revenue. How a site with a thriving online community, investments from some of the biggest names in music, and a business model that had their customers provide their service turn into a failing media company is a long road of twists, turns, controversies, a mass shooting, and Mark Zuckerberg. But before any of the memes, and before any of the lawsuits, 26-year-old Maboo was looking for a place to stay. It's August 2009. Maboo had just gotten fired from his law firm after writing a blog post making fun of Allstate Insurance titled Ball State Insurance. Now sleeping on the floor of his friend Alon's apartment, Maboo was explaining lines from the classic Cameron album Purple Haze to Tom, Alon's roommate. Tom wasn't a very big fan of rap, but he was working help desk at an investment firm in the city and did some programming on the side. So as the conversation goes on, it eventually morphs into the idea of turning Maboo's knowledge into a website, where people like Tom could come on and understand the meaning behind the songs that they listen to. Tom developed the site Rap Exegesis in just 6 hours. The earliest version of the site was barely usable, but the idea of something great was there. Realizing that nobody was going to use a website called Rap Exegesis, they quickly switched over to using the name Rap Genius, and after a couple months of low-level traffic, the two, along with Alon, began starting to take the site seriously. Maboo himself did many of the earliest annotations, some of which you can still find on the site. It was clear from the start that Maboo was the public face of the company, interacting with its online community and building the site through Twitter, while Tom and Alon handled the more technical and business aspects of running a new startup. Inspired by the film The Social Network, both Tom and Alon, who was working as a celebrity hypnotherapist, left their day jobs to help Maboo work on the site full time. Living off their savings and working from their home office, they went fully in on what would soon become the most popular lyric site ever. By 2011, the site was getting over 1 million unique visitors every month. Around this time, Rap Genius decided to implement a forum directly onto the site. With their rising popularity, this should be the biggest rap forum ever. They had already built the foundation and were now fully building out a community. With the new flock of rap fans, Rap Genius applied to startup incubator Y Combinator, where they managed to raise $1.8 million in seed funding, which now gave them the ability to move into an actual office. College students Eric Benna and Mark Andreessen watch a demonstration of the web browser Viola WWW at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. The browser was very limited, but this demonstration inspired Eric and Mark to develop a web browser themselves, one that could be used by the general public. On January 23, 1993, they released an alpha version of Mosaic. Commonly thought to be the first widely used web browser, Mosaic was incredibly successful. Mosaic helped rectify many of the shortcomings other more limited browsers were facing at the time. But there was one feature Mosaic had planned but had to leave on the cutting room floor: group annotations. To implement this properly would require a server to host all the annotations, and because they didn't have time to build that to scale, they dropped the feature entirely. After hearing about Rap Genius, venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz invests $15 million into the startup, with Horowitz adding that it's one of the most important things they've ever funded. 2012 would be a big year for Rap Genius. They had grown to over 10 million monthly users, 17 full-time employees, and implemented a verified artist feature to give verified annotations behind the meaning of lyrics. In December, the three founders were featured on Forbes' 30 Under 30. But it's 2013 that would prove to be the peak for Rap Genius. Maboo was invited to dinner at Ben Horowitz's house along with Nas and Mark Zuckerberg. After asking permission and being told no, Maboo snapped a photo of the dinner and posted it to the Rap Genius Instagram. Because of this, Zuck demanded he remove the photo and issue an apology. Zuckerberg was actually a supporter of Rap Genius early on and had already known of Maboo. They even exchanged texts. Later, during an interview about the incident, Maboo would tell Zuck to, quote, "Zuck his dick," something he would also tweet later in the year at Warren Buffett, while starting a Warren Buffett diss track competition on Rap Genius. This tweet caused Jay-Z to pull out of a meeting they had scheduled. Maboo chalked these outbursts up to the fact that he was suffering from a brain tumor. But that's not the actual reason. The team at Rap Genius took on the idea that any publicity is good publicity, and they would push this idea as far as they could. In May, Maboo, along with Tom and Alon, were scheduled for what many saw as the first public introduction to Rap Genius, a 30-minute panel at the annual tech conference, TechCrunch Disrupt. Their panel would solidify what many already thought of the trio. Labeled foul-mouthed tech bro douchebags, they played into the personas thought up to try and attract attention. Something very different in the tech scene, almost like something out of a movie. They also said that the future of Rap Genius wasn't Rap Genius, but News Genius, and that they were actively working on spreading the annotation aspect to every website on the internet, as well as saying that in just a year, Rap Genius will be bigger than Facebook. In July, they added sections for Rock Genius, Poetry Genius, and News Genius, and with the new sections of the site was more popular than ever, and the forum was exploding, until they were delisted by Google in December for predatory SEO tactics. Genius was agreeing to tweet out rap blogs in exchange for the blogs posting Genius links to the songs they were talking about, in turn boosting Rap Genius's SEO to Google's web crawler. Google doesn't usually fuck around when it comes to things like this, but they gave Genius a little slap on the wrist, made them fix some links, and 2 weeks later they were back on top of search results. I guess being multi-millionaire Yale graduates has its perks, but this wouldn't be the last issue they had with Google. Less than a year later, Google would begin showing lyrics in their search results, cutting off much of Genius's traffic. Coming into 2014 though, Genius was on top of the world, and their business model was nothing if not expansion. So much so that they began neglecting the forums. In May of that year, as they were gearing up to reveal a dozen new Genius products, 3 hours after the Isla Vista shooting that left 6 dead and many others injured, users not only managed to upload the incel manifesto, but began annotating it. Users along with Maboo, who would go on to describe the killer's writing as beautiful and add that his sister is probably smoking hot. The annotations not only didn't attempt to enhance anyone's understanding of the text, but went beyond that into gleeful insensitivity and misogyny. Maybe it was his brain tumor. Maybe it was the fact that it had been a year since TechCrunch, and surprisingly, Rap Genius was not bigger than Facebook. Genius forced Maboo to resign and ended any relationship they had with him whatsoever. With Maboo now out of the picture, Rap Genius decided to fully redesign the site and even dropped the rap to just Genius. They raised $40 million in Series B funding and officially launched sections for Fashion Genius, as well as Tech Genius, Screen Genius, History Genius, Sports Genius, Lit Genius, Pop Genius, R&B Genius, Meta Genius, X Genius, even Law Genius, where you can help annotate the IRS's 1040. They were rapidly expanding, but at the cost of the community. Maboo was the de facto community leader, so when he left, so did almost any transparency with the company. The forum users were asking for quality of life updates for years. It was still on the basic design platform it had been on, and frankly, the design was horrible. With the rise of sites like Kanye Titha and Section 80 that had no real backing, certainly not one of Genius's size, it made no sense for their site to look like this. The forum sections were just confusing, and a lot of them arbitrary. And once you got into a thread, maybe one with 1,000 replies, you'd have to scroll through every reply. There was, and still is, no page element. The site design was so bad, even Kanye reached out to Ben Horowitz and offered to redesign the site. The site remained mostly the same leading into 2015. All the extra sections Genius had didn't really pan out. Unlike their belief that Vogue would hire you if you had a high fashion genius IQ, nobody was going to Genius to talk about fashion, or Malcolm X's autobiography. In the middle of 2015, they started yet another site redesign, except this time it came with a new logo, one that would become iconic for the brand. Before they went public with this change, they asked feedback from inside their community. The response was overwhelmingly negative, but they negated all feedback and publicized the change anyway. Around this time, the now 2 co-founders went on a press run talking about how they go to couples therapy and retconning the entire founding of Genius, stating that it had started from a conversation the two had, completely wiping away Maboo's contributions. Realizing the extra sections were going nowhere, they also collapsed back into just Genius and set their sights on annotating the world. They released a browser extension that would allow anybody to annotate any website at any time, and partnered with the Washington Post to annotate the presidential debates. They labeled this News Genius. The extension was ultimately a failure. You couldn't see annotations unless you also had the extension. The entire reason Andreessen Horowitz invested in the first place was the potential to annotate other sites. And with the backlash for the extension potentially promoting ways to spread misinformation and cyberbully others, it was eventually discontinued. So now, with their ultimate goal wiped away, Genius pivoted in another direction. Original content. After a video of Designer explaining his lyrics went viral, they decided to turn the verified annotation feature on their site into a whole video series. This would end up becoming their flagship series. And to many watching this video, this may be all you know Genius for. They hired Rob Markman to be the head of artist relations, reaching out to artists and filming interviews. He kind of became the new face of the company. They started Genius News, not to be confused with News Genius or the other News Genius, and dived headfirst into producing new video content for YouTube. They didn't even host the videos on their own site, and because of this, the community felt like Genius had turned their back on them. Many users begun leaving en masse. I mean, these are the same people you expect to transcribe and annotate your lyrics, funding your entire website, but you can't give them basic platform updates they request. At this point, Genius had already funded $79 million, and the forums still looked like this. They sunk every last dollar into video content and let their site rot in the process. This continued this way for years, with the forum numbers dwindling, many of the site's annotations becoming poor, and many songs not getting annotated at all. Genius had fully turned their back on their site and were no longer interested in anything but YouTube. In June 2019, Genius filed a lawsuit against Google and lyric provider LyricFind, seeking $50 million. In Google's never-ending endeavor to conquer every corner of the internet marketplace, not only did they begin to show lyrics on their search results, but allegedly had sourced them from Genius. Genius had begun embedding Morse code into the transcription of their lyrics that read red-handed. With this, they proved that 90% of all Google's lyrics had come from Genius. And not only that, but once Google incorporates lyrics onto their search results, click-throughs to Genius dropped 94%. The lawsuit would be dismissed after the judge found that Genius's lyric transcriptions were derivative works and that they did not hold the copyright to the lyrics, meaning that they could not claim Google's display of them as a copyright violation. After being beaten in the court by Google, while simultaneously relying on them to keep their company afloat, Genius began to focus on live content, hosted on Twitch. During the height of the pandemic, Genius started Genius Live, where viewers could send money to ask their favorite artists questions during a live Q&A and performance. The funding for this project spurred a round of layoffs within the company. One of the employees told Fine Print New York, "We were all like, this is a bad idea. No major artist is going to sign up for this, and people aren't going to want to sit at home and pay $100 to ask Wiz Khalifa, what's your favorite cereal?" And he was right. Genius Live was a failure, much like Genius News, News Genius, and all of their other endeavors. In mid-2020, the Great Maboo would return, with an article posted to Hacker News calling for the resignation of Tom Lehman and Alon Zachary, calling them two white guys who have no black friends, are mildly racist, and have zero passion for hip-hop. Maboo was looked at as a disgruntled employee, so his accusations didn't make any headlines. But in the same week, Alon's wife, Andre Gelman, had resigned from a company she co-founded after accusations of profiling and mistreatment to black and brown employees. A month after Maboo's article came out, Alon himself resigned as president of Genius to go back to celebrity hypnotherapy, and they replaced him with Mickey Tolliver King, the first black exec for Genius. Genius had already become a sinking ship, and in September 2021, with less than 500,000 of the 79 million they had once funded, Tom Lehman hosted an all-staff Zoom meeting where he announced that Genius had just been sold in a fire sale to holding company Media Lab for $80 million, and that since the total purchase price that will be distributable to the shareholders is significantly lower than the liquidation preference of preferred shareholders, holders of common stock and options will not receive any consideration. With Media Lab adding that some very talented individuals on the content and production teams were going to be let go. They fired an undisclosed amount of employees, made employee stock options worthless, but somehow the execs of the company walked away with huge paydays. Tom Lehman, $13 million. Alon Zachary, $8 million. 4 other unnamed execs, multi $20 million parachutes. Rob Marksman only $600,000. Mickey King doesn't work there anymore. Maboo is currently suing the company, and the community is dead. Verified is the only thing that's keeping Genius alive. If not for Verified, the company would have been bankrupt a long time ago, and Media Lab would have never picked them up. Every time you see that yellow background, it should remind you of just how bad Genius dropped the ball by trying to expand too fast, neglecting their core user base, neglecting the core foundation of providing lyrics, and turning their back on their community, a community that doesn't even exist anymore.